Hello, everyone. Welcome to EmpoweU. I'm Dan Reganold. Educate, enjoy, engage. That is the goal of these free sessions, to get you more empowered in your lives. Hey, we want to get you involved in really important topics tonight, like privacy, security for your devices, and our continuous discussion that we've been having with you about how to protect yourself from big tech. So I wanted to just give you some wit and wisdom tonight from somebody who's fun. I hadn't seen this quote in a while, and somebody mentioned it to me, and this is from Mark Twain. He said, "Sometimes I wonder whether the world is being run by smart people who are putting us on, or by imbeciles who really mean it." To all the cancel culturers out there, please leave Huck Finn alone. Hey, we're really glad you're here tonight. I want to introduce you to our virtual team of people who help put on these sessions. We've got Betty Overstreet, our great executive director, Jill Google, our operations manager, Bill Roll, our treasurer, Jay Grunke on the board tonight. Also our important board members, Joe Platt, our political guru, Ken Bowman, Karen Cartier, Bill Monnier, Nita Thomas, and Barb Horowitz. Our board is really honored to have the opportunity to learn with you. And yes, we've also got kind of a friend of EmpoweU, a member, and this is Justin Bennick Thomas. He's one of the founders of EmpoweU. Several of you probably know him. He's the one who came up with the slogan, educate, enjoy, engage, which I really think kind of says it all. So interesting story about Justin. When Sean Hannity came to Cincinnati, I can't remember if it was 2010 or 2011, Hannity got off the plane to come and speak to people at University of Cincinnati. And Fox News they ordered him to get back on the plane and return to New York, and they wouldn't let him speak to Cincinnati. They made him get on a plane and fly home. Justin, this guy here, is the one who had the opportunity to come out and talk to it was a huge crowd of 8 or 9 or 10,000 people. What a bad job that was that night. But Justin just couldn't help to mess with me today with this picture on the beach, which looks pretty good when we're in the middle of a monsoon. So, hey, listen, spring is coming. Thank goodness. Hey, we are a free university, and we just ask that you consider throwing in a couple bucks. You can do that on EmpoweUOhio.org, our website, or you can do that when you're signing up for any class. We appreciate it, and many, many of you have. April 6th, we return to EmpoweU Studio, and we're looking forward to seeing live people there. So as you know, we always have a required reading session, something that I want you to take a look at. This is an interesting article that popped up from an Ohio school board member. We talked about the school board the other night. Her name is Lisa Woods. She left the board at the end of 2020, just a couple months ago. This is a good primer on the kinds of things that are going on in Ohio. You'll read about the teachers union taking over this board. You'll hear about critical race theory. You'll hear about pitting students against students, about indoctrination. And then I was sitting at my desk this afternoon at 4 o'clock, and somebody sent me another just wild article about education in Ohio. These are not my words. This is an article that says, a Black woman spoke up at a school board meeting in Beechwood, Ohio, to take issue with the board's use of critical race and gender theory that's used to divide students, pit students against their parents, and create a racist environment. This is the woman's words. If a lot more of the residents knew of the mess you've made of this school system via the curriculum you've made as policy, you would all probably lose your position in the district. Watch this second link that I've provided you on EmpoweUOhio.org. Watch the video in this link. It's powerful. Other than the immigration mess, I haven't heard of any single story that's been covered more in the news over the last few days than these wild stories about critical race theory and education. Things like Loudoun County, Virginia, where the teachers are now compiling lists of parents who question racial curriculum. They're actually keeping lists of parents. So what does Ron DeSantis of Florida have to say about schools? He says our schools are supposed to give people a foundation of knowledge. They're not supposed to be indoctrination centers where you're trying to push specific ideologies. DeSantis has an interesting proposal that will direct the Florida Department of Education to create the Florida Civic Seal of Excellence, a new professional endorsement for civics education, Teachers who complete the training will be eligible for a $3,000 bonus, DeSantis said. Let me be clear, DeSantis said, there's no room in our classrooms for things like critical race theory, teaching. I'm speaking to empowered citizens tonight, and that's you. Put your foot down. You have to step up in some way on this critical race division thing that's happening. There will be ways for you to step up. They're coming. And I encourage you to read the 2 required reading sessions, articles that I put on EmpowerU tonight, and read about Lisa Wood's a great leader, and read about this parent that stepped up. So it's important. Tonight's giveaway, we haven't been able to come to Frame USA for a while, so we've got a great giveaway, a $75 gift card for picture frames at frameusa.com or Frame USA's retail store. Here is a chance for you to get some great American-made picture frames on the house from EmpowerU. All you have to do is go down to the bottom of your screen and enter your email address for the chance to win. Just enter your email address. And just to show you that I can be a nice guy, I'm going to throw in this "Don't Tread on Me" face mask. Hopefully not required wearing material for people for very much longer. So, but it's kind of fun. So enter to win the chance. And at the end of the session, hopefully I'll remember to let you know who won. So Tuesday night, we had a great session on the Convention of States. And Mike Mowry was here. I've put lots of information up on the website about what he talked about. And to Rich Inman, a big thanks for your help with MeWe. How are you all doing out there on MeWe with your work? Donna, hey, thanks for just sending me a friend request. I appreciate it. All of you, if you want to send me a friend request on MeWe to get some practice, please do. And if you want to rewatch the class on MeWe, kind of at your own pace, you can just call it up at EmpowerU and look for the class date and lodge the link and watch it or share it with your friends. So we've got a big class coming up Tuesday night, March 23rd. Sean Maloney, really the foremost gun expert in the state of Ohio. He'll be reviewing with you basic concepts of legal force. How are they interpreted by the legal systems, and what that means to you as a gun owner. It's going to be a great class, but I want to get on to our class of the night because I know you're all ready to go. And I'm so excited to have Dave Hatter back here tonight. Dave is a technology leader with nearly 30 years of software development, cybersecurity, and project management experience. He has earned numerous industry certifications and holds a BS in information systems from NKU. He's especially good at bridging the gap between business and technology and has delivered more than 200 successful software solutions. Additionally, he's written or contributed to 12 technology books. Libertas Technologies, the software development company Dave founded in 2001, was honored with many awards, but he's especially proud of winning the Cincinnati Better Business Bureau's Torch Award for Marketplace Ethics. Dave is now a cybersecurity consultant at Intrust IT, where he works with clients. He's also a regular contributor. You've heard him on Brian Thomas's show on Friday morning, and he's on many, many other media segments. An interesting thing about him, he has a long-term political career, and he's currently the mayor of Fort Wright, Kentucky, for one more year. So tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. Dave is going to talk until, a little bit after 8, maybe 8 or 5 after 8. And then we're going to take live questions on the telephone from you. So if you have a question for Dave, you could ask it on the Q&A at the bottom, but we'd rather have you call in. And you can call this phone number, 513-672-1266, 513-672-1266, starting about 5 till 8, 5 after 8, and you'll be able to ask Dave questions yourself.
And that's actually, the number is actually 572-1266. Oh, my
goodness.
572-1266.
Typographical error. Apologies.
I'll put it up on the screen as soon as you finish your screen share.
Good. So it's 513-572-1266. So we look forward to getting your calls, and we'll have to get the EmpowerU typist for that one. So Dave Hatter, we're just glad to have you at EmpowerU. Welcome. It's good to have you here.
Well, thanks, Dan. It's good to be back, and I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about this stuff because I think we're We're in a time now where cybersecurity and privacy as an adjunct to it are increasingly important. So I got a lot of material to cover. I'm just going to dive right into this thing. Yeah, send your questions in. I'm happy to help. So with that, let me share my screen. And hopefully you guys can see that. And
you're good.
All right, good. So I thought this was kind of an interesting image here. I always like this because it really sort of drives home the point here that I'm hopefully going to make tonight. So Dan already kind of touched on my background. I've been in the IT business for a long time, mostly as a software engineer, more recently specifically focused on cybersecurity. I think this is an interesting quote from Tim Cook here. I'm not going to read all this stuff to you, and you can have a copy of this slide deck or go back and watch this video again. Andy Grove is the former CEO of Intel. He said privacy is one of the biggest problems in this new electronic age, and I certainly agree with that. You know, we get a lot of convenience and a lot of functionality out of all these great new devices. They make our lives a lot easier, but in many ways, you know, they're capturing information that most people don't really understand and they don't really know how it's used. I also think it's kind of funny that, you know, people call me Doomsday Dave. I always seem to have nothing but bad news about this stuff, despite the fact that, you know, I've made a living doing it for a long time. So they made me this nice aluminum foil hat at the office. I thought that was pretty funny. So I always like to show that. And then I think probably that if you don't walk away with anything else tonight, if you just remember this, if you're not paying with money, you're paying with data, you're the product, not the customer. So before you buy that shiny new IoT device or whatever, and we'll get into that in a lot of detail here in a minute, just keep that in mind. So hopefully tonight, I'm going to educate you. I'm going to motivate you. I'm going to provide a lot of actionable advice, and hopefully we'll have a little fun along the way. I always like to start out just pointing out some recent headlines. So I'm not going to read all these to you, but there's a couple in here, and these are all fairly recent stories. T-Mobile to share customers' web browsing data with advertisers unless they opt out. You're going to have to explicitly opt out. Over 1 billion Android phones turned into perfect spying tools by security flaws. China wants your data and may already have it. Thousands of Android and iOS apps leak data from the cloud. And again, we'll get into the backstory behind a lot of this here. Gifts that snoop, the Internet of Things is wrapped in privacy concerns. For those people who have smart speakers, again, I'm pretty much dead set against these things at the moment. Smart speakers mistakenly eavesdrop up to 19 times a day. So you can see these are headlines. You don't have to look too far to find any number of additional headlines, both from the privacy and cybersecurity standpoint. And I'm going to try to weave those two things together as much as possible over the course of this hour. I mean, they're really kind of separate topics, and I'm going to discuss that as well, but it's a lot of ground to cover. And again, I'm going to give you some actionable advice and some tips you can walk away with from here tonight and improve your privacy and security. So why is all this stuff happening now? There's a lot of reasons for it. You know, A, your data is worth a lot of money and people are making a lot of money with it. And B, you know, we have increasing uses of technology in every facet of life. It's never been easier to go get the resources that you need to launch hacking campaigns. You can go out, spin up a server somewhere in a foreign country where you're outside the reach of the US law enforcement. You might spend 20 bucks, run it for 3 days, shut it down, move it somewhere else. It's never been easier or cheaper to do this kind of thing. You have untraceable worldwide communications. Thanks to encryption, I can make it very difficult for you to track me down if I know what I'm doing. We've got virtual international currency, Bitcoin, all different types of cryptocurrency. So when you get hit with ransomware, the bad guys get you to pay with Bitcoin. They run a server here, shut it down, move it there. They make it very difficult, if they're any good, to be captured, to even be tracked down. And one of the problems in this whole space is attribution. There have been some recent headlines about the US potentially looking to hack back, right? And that's very problematic in my mind, because in many cases, as time wears on, you find out that who you originally think did something isn't who did it after all. So, you know, it's confusing, it's moving very quickly, and you have all these things that are relatively new within the last 5 to 10 years that make it very easy for the bad guys. And then throw in an ever increasing number of interconnected devices, right? Smartphones, Internet of Things devices like coffee makers and Ring doorbells and Nest thermostats and so forth. Smart speakers, people are buying these things, they're plugging them in with little thought to the security and privacy concerns that they create, which we'll get here to in a minute. And then, you know, crime is going digital. I saw a headline the other day, I didn't include it in that screenshot I sent you there. Some people are anticipating cybercrime could hit $1 trillion by 2025. I'm sorry, 10 trillion. I misspoke, 10 trillion. And I got that in here as a bullet point. One study, and this is a couple of years ago, put the current value at that time at $1.5 trillion. I can also tell you that if you look, the FBI will claim only about 10 to 12% of all cybercrime is reported for a variety of reasons. So These numbers are probably a lot larger. No one really knows for sure. But the fact of the matter is the cost of cybercrime is rapidly rising. I saw another story earlier today that the record ransom request so far, at least that's known anyway, is $30 million. One ransom request for $30 million. So the bad guys are making a lot of money, and you don't have to look too far to realize they're rarely prosecuted. So another thing that's feeding into this, we're creating more data. More people are spending more time on more devices. If I were there in person, I would ask how many people here have a smartphone. I would bet virtually every one of you does. Some of you probably have other types of smart devices. Your car, new cars, right? They're smart devices, smart TVs. You've got all these things. So in addition to data you're explicitly creating by using these devices, you're creating what we call in the business data exhaust, data that's created about you just based on using different devices. There was an interesting story recently about how these new smart TVs capture everything you watch, regardless of whether it's being streamed, coming over the air, through a cable box or whatever. They've built technology into these things. So it's literally capturing sometimes as frequently as every second, everything that you're watching. So you got more data being created. This is kind of interesting, especially if you go back and look at these over time. And by the way, Statista is a great online resource for all kinds of various statistics. Big fan of that site. I won't read all these to you, but again, I don't think it's any big surprise that we're creating a lot more data, and frankly, a lot more quickly, especially as more and more devices become smart, quote unquote. This next slide, I think, is kind of interesting because it does a nice job of showing all the different ways that your devices are collecting data about you, right? It's not just your computer. It's not just your smartphone. It's not just your tablet. It's, again, all these smart devices that we are increasingly interacting with in our home and office life. Tons and tons of information is out there. You're creating data exhaust as a result of that, all these devices as well. And I don't think I have to tell anyone this, even though people will often say, well, I have nothing to hide. I'm just one person. I'm a small business. What do I have that's valuable? So here was a study by Experian where they try to put a dollar amount on information being sold on the dark web. And you can see what various types of information are worth out there. And again, I won't read the whole thing to you. Some things aren't worth that much because they're relatively easy to get. Other things are worth quite a bit. And in many cases, that's because once the bad guys have it, they can perpetrate fraud with it for extended periods of time before they get caught. And one thing I would encourage anyone who has children or grandchildren to talk to them about and to consider is bad guys love to steal the identity of children. Here's why. If your child is fairly young, the likelihood of them applying for a credit card, applying for a job, or doing anything that would trigger the fact that, hey, there's some kind of fraud going on out here with this person's identity is very unlikely. They might be able to ride that out for an extended period of time, a couple of years, 5 years, maybe even 10 years. So it's important to understand that as your kids are being increasingly exposed to this technology, bad guys want to steal their information. And again, they may not find out until 5 years later, 10 years later, when they go to apply for a job, try to get a loan for college, apply for a credit card, or that sort of thing. And now they've got a major problem on their hands trying to unwind the fraud that's been done in their name. Data is increasingly valuable, not only the Experian study, but if you look at this, I think this is really pretty astounding. So again, also from Statista, most valuable brands worldwide, you got Apple, 263 billion, Amazon, 254 billion, Google, 192 billion. You see Microsoft in here, you see Facebook in here. Okay, interestingly enough, Apple's been around since the 70s, Microsoft's been around since the 70s. Amazon, Google, and Facebook are all 20 years old or less. They're three of the most valuable companies in the world, and they make almost all of their money from your data. Apple, and I'm going to talk about this in a lot more detail in here in a bit, Apple is really more of a products-oriented company, as is Microsoft. They actually make products that you buy, hardware, software, different things. What is Google's product? Well, they make Android. They do make some phones, right? They bought Motorola, but generally they're making all this money off data. What is Facebook's product? It's data. They made that crazy portal thing. I think they might've sold 2 or 3 of them. It's data, right? So, and you see other companies in here like WeChat, Verizon. Yes, they're selling a valuable service through, the carrier, the service they provide for your phone, but they're mostly a data company as well. And then again, you can see the folks behind many of these companies are some of the richest people in the world. So your data is valuable, whether you believe it or not. People want it. It's not always nefarious, but it is valuable to them. And it can be used in various nefarious ways and in ways that aren't immediately obvious to people. So I think it's kind of interesting when you look into this, because another problem is people don't realize, okay, well, I'm not going to use Facebook anymore. Well, if you're still using Instagram or WhatsApp, you're still giving your data to Facebook. And recently, there's been a big kerfluffle around WhatsApp, right? Facebook purchased WhatsApp. If you haven't used it, it's a messaging app. They're going to change. They announced they're changing their privacy policy. They backed off of it a little bit, but they're basically saying, you know, they're going to take all your data from WhatsApp because they're Facebook and they want that data. And literally millions of people switched almost overnight to Telegram or Signal, two more secure and more privacy-friendly messaging apps. You know, if you look at Facebook's annual revenue, so in 2009, we're down here. In 2020, we're up here. I mean, it's an astounding growth. And again, primarily fueled with your data, information you're giving them free, right? It's pretty incredible. I mean, it's hard to argue that these folks are very smart. And it's amazing that they've managed to take a company in, you know, roughly 10 years time from, you know, roughly $13 billion to $85 billion in 10 years time. It's crazy. And again, primarily driven by data, almost exclusively in their case. Alphabet. So, you know, Google's parent company is now Alphabet. Alphabet owns a whole bunch of things. If you're using an Android phone, if you use YouTube, if you use Gmail, the Chrome browser, they have a much larger footprint than Facebook. They're collecting data in all kinds of different ways. And if we kind of look at their revenue here, again, pretty astounding as well. 37 billion in 2011 from a company that's, you know, roughly 20 years old. You know, they were around maybe 10 to 12 years before that, to 182 billion. Yes, they do make some products. The Android operating system, again, they make some phones. They got a few things out there. But for the most part, they're making all this money off data. And in most cases, data that you are voluntarily providing to them for free. And then you can see Amazon here. Most people don't really realize what a big player Amazon is in this space. They think of the Amazon website. They think of purchasing things from Amazon. But Amazon has Amazon Web Services. They own a bunch of stuff. And while a lot of this revenue is not necessarily derived off of data, an enormous amount of it is as well. And again, phenomenal what Bezos has done. You know, 2004, $6.92 billion. We're at $386 billion. So in less than 20 years, you know, it's just an amazing amount of growth. Who does Amazon own? Amazon owns all kinds of things. Amazon Web Services, they own Ring, they own Zappos, they own Audible. I was a big fan of Audible books, but I'm kind of done with Amazon. So I finally stopped using it simply because I don't want to give them my data. And you can see there's all kinds of issues with Alexa. I'm going to talk specifically about that in a bit. This is a fascinating story here. They know us better than we know ourselves, how Amazon tracked my last 2 years of reading. So a writer went out and looked into this and found, I mean, like, if you use a Kindle, if you use Audible, they literally know how much time you spend on a page, what you highlight. They know everything about your reading habits. Is that bad? Not necessarily, but who else has access to that data? How is that data being aggregated? What sort of inferences are they drawing about you as a result? Who are they selling that data to that are using it in various algorithms like social credit scores to say you might or might not be a good renter, or you might or might not be a good employee? I mean, that stuff is happening behind the scenes right now. And I don't think most people, A, realize it. B, there's really no way to see into those processes and how they're making these decisions. And they're using your data to do this. Again, it's not necessarily bad, but I don't think most people really understand it. And I think this is kind of funny. So you have all these people making all this money off your data because you're using these so-called free apps. Remember, if you're not paying with money or paying with data, you are the product, not the customer. So I thought that was kind of funny. You know, you cut out the middleman and just sell your own data. Open source intelligence. So this cuts to both the privacy and security aspects of this. When you hear someone say OSINT, open source intelligence, there's all this information out there about you now. It's never been easier for bad guys to get a hold of that information to use to impersonate you, to launch phishing attacks and things like that, as well as then to buy data from this source, buy data from that source, aggregate that data, sell it to someone else, leak that data. Again, data is valuable. It has value in and of itself, and it also has value because it can be used in various ways to defraud you, defraud organizations you're involved in, et cetera. Most people who've never heard of this are quite shocked when they see this. So Shodan is a search engine. It's specifically designed to find Internet of Things devices. It's designed to find things connected to the internet. So when you go out and you buy your brand new smart TV or your smart coffee maker or refrigerator, whatever it is, this search engine is specifically designed to find those things. If you plug that in and you don't understand how to configure it correctly, you don't change the default password, you don't update it, this search engine makes it easy for the bad guys to find that device and hack it. Again, I'm going to talk more about those things specifically in a bit, but I'd encourage you, just check it out. I think you might be surprised what that thing can do. And we're really just scratching the surface of the kind of tools the bad guys have access to. And another reason why this is all happening now, you've got a whole different type of set of hackers out there, all the way from recreational types, the teenager in his mom's basement wearing the hoodie and the Guy Fawkes mask like this, out to the state-sponsored hackers. I'm sure some of you have probably heard about SolarWinds hack. I won't get into too much detail here where you can ask questions if you want at the end, but I would say it's probably the single worst hack to date, simply because of the scope of it and the sophistication of the attack. More recently, it's been in the news a lot. For businesses that have Microsoft Exchange Server on premises, Chinese nation state actors have launched hacks on that on Exchange Server. It's a huge problem. And then, in between, you have anything from this sort of a run-of-the-mill criminal up to organized crime. Ransomware gangs that are literally raking in tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year. The Ryuk ransomware gang last year claimed they made $100 million in 1 year. So there's an enormous amount of money to be made here. And again, it's rare when these people are prosecuted. They're rarely caught and almost never prosecuted because in most cases, they're outside the reach of law enforcement in the United States. Then you throw in the Internet of Things. I'm going to keep coming back to this because for the most part, the Internet of Things, in my opinion, is just a giant privacy and security dumpster fire in its current state. Again, a lot of these devices bring a lot of functionality, but do I really need to know that my laundry is done by getting a text in my phone? Not really. Do I really need to be able to talk to something to turn up the lights in the room? Not really. I mean, it's convenient. It's kind of cool. It's got a bit of a wow factor. But based on the current state of security and privacy, as you'll see in a moment, these things just don't make sense to me. But people keep buying them. They're buying them for their personal use. They're buying them for office use. And in many cases, we're seeing increasing automation in the industrial sector, things around sensors. Machinery there's a lot of benefit to that, right? If you can see into a process in a factory somewhere and see that if you make this change, you can save yourself a lot of money, save yourself electricity, whatever it is you're trying to optimize, those things can make a big difference. But again, a lot of times they're sort of inherently insecure out of the box and opening up a lot of risk to the business and a lot of opportunity for the bad guys, unfortunately. And probably one of the biggest parts of all of this, and I think this is true across the board, security is often an afterthought, especially in these IoT devices. Many non-nerds out there, people who aren't dorks like me, don't spend a lot of time thinking about security. And I get that, right? They're more concerned with productivity, ease of use. And that's one of the things that makes the whole IoT space so difficult is as a manufacturer, you want to be first to market. You want to capture as much market share as possible. And if you make something more secure, that typically adds friction. It makes it more difficult to use that device. And as a result, it often causes problems with the consumers that use it. So they're trying to strike a balance between should I go for more security or more usability? And unfortunately, I think they err mostly on the side of usability. So many of these things are literally just wide open disasters. And we could probably spend the next 10 minutes and I could just go search on DuckDuckGo because I don't use Google. And you would just see story after story after story about problems with Internet of Things devices. It's just too soon for most of these things. And when you plug these things in, if you don't know how to secure it, if you don't keep it updated, you're literally opening a portal into your network for the bad guys to attack. And we'll get into that in more detail here in a second. I think this is funny, yet sad at the same time. These in theory are all these different so-called smart devices or Internet of Things devices in a house. And, $20 in my PayPal account are all only brew decaf. I'm turning off the heat till you warm up my bank account. Send me $25 or I'll tell everyone in your social network that you were stupid enough to buy an internet connected broom. This one I think is probably one of the more interesting and scary ones. $30 in Bitcoin, or the next time I smell smoke, I might just let you sleep. These are funny, but that's the sort of place we're at today, right? Everything that this is saying is theoretically possible. And in some cases, there are, proof of concept attacks out there where researchers are showing how these devices can be exploited. Something else I wanted to touch on before we kind of get into the meat of this now is privacy does not equal security. They're really two different things. They certainly intersect with one another. And to the extent possible, the more they overlap, the better for you. But privacy is how you control your information. Security is how that information is protected. My point being, you may have all kinds of security around your device. Someone may have a very difficult time breaking into it. I would never say it's impossible, but you're freely giving up information, right? You're using social media, you're using these devices that are capturing your information. So you have security without privacy, or vice versa. You may have information that's written down on a piece of paper, right? It's private, no one else can see it, but the devices that you're using every day aren't secure. So people kind of conflate these things. And again, there is a lot of overlap. To the extent that you get more of both, that's good, but they're not really the same thing. Few privacy myths I want to touch on. It's impossible to maintain privacy in today's world. It's certainly more difficult than it's ever been. And it's getting more difficult all the time as things become more dependent on digital technology. But it's certainly possible, especially if you make a conscious effort to choose privacy. I already touched on this. The data that you have or your data is not valuable. It is. They want it. They are making enormous amounts of money off of it. You have to be a technical wizard to protect yourself. You don't. And I have nothing to hide. At the end of this, I have several interesting articles linked that I would encourage you all to go read, because I hear this a lot. I have nothing to hide. I'm not worried about this. Well, again, when you start to understand how things like social credit scores are created and how there are companies buying your data and running it through their algorithms that they then sell to companies to make decisions like, would you be a good employee? Would you be a good renter? Would you be a good candidate for insurance? Companies are buying this data from these organizations with their algorithms who are analyzing your data to make these decisions, kind of like your credit score. I would bet most of you are not aware of that. There's no way to see into that process. There's no law like on the credit score side that says you have to be able to see that score and understand what's going into that score and be able to dispute that score. This is all happening right now and most people don't understand it. And to the extent you're putting your data out there, you're making it easier for them to do that in regards to you. And I would argue that's not a good thing. Sorry, my nose is itching here. And then some cybersecurity myths. My organization is too small or insignificant to be a target. I'm going to show you some concrete examples where that's not the case. And I could easily spend an hour just telling you real world stories that I run into almost weekly of companies who are having all kinds of different attacks simply because even if you don't have valuable information for me to steal, if I can break into your email, for example, lurk around in there for a while, figure out who you do business with, and then send fraudulent invoices to those customers and have their payments go to my bank account offshore somewhere, that can be a pretty profitable enterprise. The FBI, through their Internet Crime Complaint Center, the IC3, just yesterday released a report and said business email compromise, the kind of thing I just described, is actually generating substantially more revenue for criminals than ransomware is, even though ransomware seems to get all the headlines. And again, I'm happy to take questions on this stuff as we get further into it, because it's important for people to understand you're not too small, you're not too insignificant. If you have money in a bank account somewhere and someone who basically has access to zero resources where they live, no jobs, nothing else to do, but they got a computer, if they can steal $1,000 from you, if they can steal $100,000 from you, that's a lot of money to them. And this kind of thing is happening every single day. Requires a lot of money to keep yourself secure. It doesn't. I'm going to show you a whole laundry list of things you can do tonight that are either free or will cost next to nothing. And it will make you a much harder target, and it will make it easier for you to keep your private information private. Attacks are sophisticated or technically complex. Some of them are, like the SolarWinds attack. Many of them are not. It involves spoofing and social engineering, which we'll talk about specifically here in a minute. New software and devices are secure out of the box. That's almost never true. If you go out and buy a new smart TV and you plug it in, you connect it to your network, and you don't do anything to secure that, you're just asking for trouble. Most of these things are insecure out of the box. Compliance with industry standards is sufficient. It's a great place to start. There's all kinds of standards out there that you can gear your own personal security or your organization's security around, but merely being in compliance is not enough. And then security is an IT issue. Some of it is, there are some technical things that you have to be a nerd to be able to do, or have a nerdy friend like me that can help. But as I'm going to show you here shortly, there are many things you can do as an individual that cost virtually nothing and don't take a lot of skill or a lot of effort. You just need to know about it, and you need to have the right resources to be able to implement these things, which we'll get to here shortly. I won't read all these quotes to you, but so these are some fairly high profile people, like the former IBM CEO, Ginny Rometty. She said, cybercrime is, quote, the greatest threat to every profession, every industry, every company in the world. I totally agree with that. Former FBI Director James Comey, two kinds of companies in the United States, those who've been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. I pretty much agree with that too, especially if you're not doing anything, you're not following the advice that nerds like me are putting out there all the time to make yourself a more difficult target. So as we get deeper into this, so I'm going to kind of break down the most common threats you're likely to run into in terms of security and privacy, and then some specific defenses you can take to try to protect yourself. So a few things to think about as we move forward into the more detailed portion of this. It's impossible to be impenetrable. No matter how much money you spend, there are researchers out there who've demonstrated that even an air-gapped computer, a computer that's not even connected to anything else, can potentially be hacked if you have the right skills and the right resources and the right conditions. The goal here is to make yourself a harder target. Many of these criminals are criminals of opportunity. They're using automated tools, they're scanning, they're looking for computers and devices that are connected to the internet that are not configured correctly. And at that point, they're going to attempt to exploit them. They're looking for people who do all the wrong things, like have a password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that they use on all their accounts, right? So they're looking for those weaknesses. If you can make yourself a harder target, in many cases, they'll move on. Now, if you're the CEO of Kroger, or, you're known to have access to top secret information or something, if you're a target of where you have high value information, high value things we're stealing, they may decide to make a project out of you or your organization. But for the average person, there's about 8 or 9 simple steps you'll see here in a bit you can take, and you will be vastly more difficult to hack. You'll have enormous amounts of control over the information you're willingly giving up. And in many cases, the bad guys will just move on. You got to focus on risk. You got to figure out, where to apply your time and your money. You want to take a layered approach. No single defense is good enough, unfortunately. If you have a security team or nerds like me, get them involved as early as possible. Unfortunately, threats emerge and evolve constantly. This isn't something like where you can just fire and forget. You throw some stuff in there and then you're going to be good 2 years from now. The technology changes rapidly, as I think everyone knows, and the bad guys are constantly evolving their tactics. You can go back and look at recent information the FBI put out that during the pandemic, they saw cybercrime spike up to 400% more than at the same time last year, just from reports they got through the Internet Crime Complaint Center. And I would remind you again that they say that only 10 to 12% of all cybercrime is reported. They made hay while the sun shined around this pandemic with all kinds of phishing around vaccines, masks, where to get a test. Unfortunately, the bad guys are bad, and they'll take advantage of those kind of situations, as well as this, ever-reaching technology to try to defraud you any way they can. Education and awareness are critical. That's why I appreciate folks like Dan giving me the opportunity to come out and talk about this stuff. Because I'm hoping, just for the good of society, to help as many people as possible take this stuff seriously, realize that they can protect themselves, and take simple and cost-effective steps to do that. And then you just got to maintain a healthy dose of skepticism and paranoia. Increasingly, thanks to advances in technology, thanks to advances by the bad guys, and frankly, things like deepfakes, it's getting harder and harder to believe anything that you see or read. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. So you should maintain a healthy dose of skepticism. And I would say, if you just do these 3 things, you'll be much better off. Anytime you get anything out of the ordinary, you get a call on the phone because they'll call you. You get a text, you get an email that says, okay, this is the Hamilton County Sheriff, and if you don't send us $500 in gift cards, we're going to arrest you, or all the crazy things that happen out there that unfortunately people still seem to fall prey to. Stop. Think about what it's asking you. Is it unusual? Have you ever been asked before, right? And then protect. Be a human firewall. If you get something that claims to be from the IRS, it's very simple to do what we call in the industry, go out of band, go to the IRS website, and they'll tell you on there very clearly, they will not call you over the phone and tell you that you owe taxes, and if you don't pay in gift cards, you're going to go to jail. They have all this information on their website telling you exactly what they will and won't do. Same thing for the FBI, same thing for the Secret Service, because there's been all kinds of various spoofing and phishing attacks around those organizations, you know, that prey on people, create a sense of urgency, instill a certain amount of fear, and unfortunately people fall for this stuff. So again, we'll get to that in the defenses here in a minute. Stop, think, protect. Remember that. So let's talk about some threats. Probably the single greatest thing out there for most people is poor credential management. People use the same usernames and passwords across multiple sites, and they use horrible passwords like this. The longer your password is, of course, the more difficult it is to remember, but the more difficult it is for a computer to crack, okay? So if you're doing something like this, you are just basically asking for trouble. And I think these images are kind of funny, particularly the Cheeto here being used as a lock, right? Obviously, all you would have to do is just brush up against that door and you bust right through it. When you're using a password like 12345, or any of the passwords off the lists that come out every year of the worst passwords, and they're building those lists off billions, many billions of passwords that have been leaked or stolen out on the dark web, you know, unfortunately, people just don't take this seriously. So I'm going to show you a simple and inexpensive way to deal with that permanently. Using the same password on multiple accounts is bad. And if it's a password like this, you might as well just put your money out in the front yard and ask someone to come take it. Just put a sign that says free money, take this. You really are making it extremely easy for the bad guys. Unpatched software. I would say this is probably the next biggest problem. Unfortunately, this gets tricky for people. You have firmware, software embedded in the chips in your device that will occasionally need to be updated. You need to update the operating system, Windows, Mac, Linux, whatever you're using. You need to update the software that rides on top of the operating system. Word, Excel, Adobe Reader, all these different things that people use, right? Then we throw in things like our phones. We throw in things like all these smart devices that have software in them. If you have a reputable device from a reputable company, that vendor is occasionally going to put out updates. Sometimes it's to fix problems. Sometimes it's to patch vulnerabilities. Sometimes it's all of the above. You know, Microsoft on the second Tuesday of every month, Patch Tuesday puts out a bunch of patches. You need to be installing those things. Apple just had some critical patches for iOS devices. When these things come out, it's absolutely critical that you're installing them because in many cases, like the recent Exchange server hack that's hit the news, there were unpatched vulnerabilities. The hackers were exploiting them. Microsoft put these patches out almost immediately to their credit. And then a week later, a security company did a scan and found there were at least 80,000 servers out there that still weren't patched. These things are being actively attacked by Chinese hackers. And now they're using these same exploits to launch ransomware attacks on these servers. So installing patches, absolutely critical. I won't read all these stats to you. Hopefully you had a chance to read them while I'm kind of rambling here. Absolutely critical that you patch your software. Spoofing. I'd say this is probably the third biggest problem out there because it's never been easier for the bad guys to go out and create things that look very realistic. I could go to Dan's Frame USA website right now, copy everything off of it, and start sending emails that look like they came from Frame USA, look like they came from Dan for that matter. It's very simple.
Please.
Oh, I'm not going to do that, Dan. I would never do that to you. But my point is, it's never been easier. And that's why I'm getting to, you just can't believe anything that you get or see or read or hear, especially if it's telling you need to do something unusual. The government is not going to tell you to pay in gift cards. You know, they're not going to tell you if you don't send money via wire transfer by 3 p.m. today, the sheriff is going to arrest you. But they will go to the sheriff's website and copy everything off of it. They will send emails that to the naked eye, and I'm going to show you some concrete examples of this in a minute, that look like they came from these organizations. Now, for the average non-technical person, it can be difficult to see that these things are spoofed. There are ways to determine that. It's absolutely critical to realize this can be email, it can be text. You know, they've gotten so brazen now, in many cases, they will make phone calls. They'll have call centers in some foreign country where people are literally getting paid next to nothing, and they will call you on the phone. They'll set up entirely fake websites. I have a friend that owns a business here in the Cincinnati area. He got a call from someone who claimed that he had applied for a job there. The bad guys went out, copied his website, went to Dice, a legitimate job hunting website. It wasn't Dice, sorry, it was Monster. Went to Monster, posted a job on Monster, and the link went to this fraudulent website. The individual applied for the job, of course, was asked to supply a bunch of sensitive personal information and asked to pay for training up front that was supposed to be reimbursed after he got the job. And the whole thing was fraudulent. So my friend starts getting these calls like, hey, you know, I applied for this job. What's the status? I sent you this money. Of course, he had no idea what was going on because the bad guys, I don't know why they picked his particular company. It's a logistics company, but they did. Unless you know that you are dealing with something legitimate and you go out of band, which I'll talk about in more detail in a second, you just can't believe anything, right? Again, stop, think, protect. If you see a job that seems too good to be true, it probably is. Okay, pick up the phone. Don't use the number that you found there. Look that company up on your own. That's the out of band idea, and try to verify that it's real. You know, in the old days, we would say trust but verify. Now you really have to verify before you trust. You can't really trust anything anymore, unfortunately, because it's so easy for the bad guys to do these things. Phishing. So I put phishing after spoofing because spoofing is typically the big part of phishing. You get an email, you get a text. By text, it's called smishing. For SMS, that's the official nerdy name for text, or phishing, voice phishing. So when you hear those terms, that's what they're talking about. But they're sending very realistic stuff. It looks like it came from the organization it claims to have come from. And if they do an even remotely good job, and I'm going to show you some concrete examples here in just a second, it's very difficult to tell that it's fake, which is why it's so critical to maintain that healthy dose of skepticism and to follow the stop, think, protect, okay? It's kind of funny. My bank just emailed me, better confirm my address and social security number like they asked. They already know that information, right? They're not gonna, they don't need you to confirm that. They don't need you to confirm your password or any of that sort of stuff, okay? So here's some real world examples of phishing. So as Dan mentioned, in my spare time, I'm the mayor of Fort Wright. Thank God I'm almost done. And as you'll see here, this is an email. It says it came from me. Now, they didn't do a very good job on this. It's not spoofed very well because you can see if you just look at this carefully, it came from a Gmail account, okay? But it was sent to our public works director. And you can see here, they did enough research to figure out, because you can go to the Fort Wright website and figure out that I'm the mayor. You could look at LinkedIn and see that I'm the mayor. That's that whole open source intelligence. There's all kinds of information available to people now from their home using search engines like Google or DuckDuckGo. I won't read this whole thing to you, but it's the old gift card scam, right? I'm telling Jeff he needs to go get some gift cards because I need to buy something for council members, right? I mean, we would never do something like this in the first place. Notice that the grammar is not great. It's got some weird spacing and so forth in it. So there's a bunch of tells here that this thing is fake, but primarily that guy right there, right? They didn't do a very good job of spoofing, but I'm going to show you some much better cases of spoofing here. So this could have been absolutely devastating. Joyce is the former city clerk. She's retired now. I had just recently become mayor, but I was on city council for a long time. So we knew each other. We only have about 50 employees. Everybody knows everybody. So that helps in a situation like this. And I talk about this cybersecurity stuff constantly. I'm constantly beating on this. We put people through training and we have like a very high level of security. So here's an example. Now notice, this looks like it came from my real Fort Wright mail account, dhatter@fortwright.com. Went to Joyce, and I'll just summarize this for you. I won't read the whole thing to you. She gets an email. Again, looks like it came from my mail account. That's spoofing. That's very easy to do. Doesn't require a lot of technical skill. And basically said, hey, Joyce, how much money is on our checking account, right? That's this. So she replies to that. Of course, it's not going to me. And then she gets another email here saying, I want to do an international wire transfer. Right here, I need you to initiate 2 wire transfers, an international payment and a local payment, you know, blah, blah, blah. Thank God at that point. And by the way, at that time, I did not have an iPhone. So there's a tell there. But, you know, she didn't know that. It doesn't have like a signature block. I have an official signature block in there. So there are some tells. But thank God she had the sense at that point to say something is not right about this, right? The stop, think, protect. She stopped. She thought about it, said this doesn't feel right. We don't do wire transfers. We don't do any sort of international business. And at that point, she picked up the phone and said, Dave, I got this email from you. What is this about? I'm like, thank God you called me, because this is some kind of scam. And we could have literally been out hundreds of thousands or possibly millions of dollars as a result of this. This is happening every day. Okay. So here's another one, kind of funny. This is the latest version of Outlook Online. We use Microsoft 365. Fairly good spoofing job here, except there is no Jay Holloway that works for the city, right? And we've also added things like these banners in now. Anytime an email lands inside the Fortright mail system, if it came from an outside source, no matter what it shows here, it will tell you it came from an external source. And this is, I got a gift card from this guy or whatever, supposedly. And you can see, I put my mouse over it, that pops up and it's going to some, notice, it even says micro ransom in the URL. I can't see that here, right? So again, this is fairly good job of spoofing. Unfortunately for them, there is no Jay Holloway there. But in a large organization, you wouldn't know that, right? If you were a resident of Fortright and got something like this, you wouldn't know that that person doesn't work here necessarily, unless you went out of band, went to the Fortright website and tried to look up that employee or called the city building based on a number that you could find on your own and say, hey, I got this thing from a Jay Holloway. Is this legit? That's the whole idea of going out of band, because as you can see, I'm going to keep changing. These keep getting better and better. Now here's one. And if you knew my wife, you would know why this could possibly be real. How she's put up with me all these years, I don't know. I got this at my Fortright account, and it looks like it came from a legitimate law firm telling me that my wife has filed the divorce papers and I should click here to read them. Well, of course, again, they're trying to create a sense of urgency. They're trying to play on your fears that this could be real. And you can see when I mouse over it, that's going off to somewhere where I'm sure it was going to ask me to log in. They're going to steal my credentials, and at that point do who knows what. But this is a pretty good spoofed email. Last couple, and then we'll move on to the topic. So also in my spare time, I've been an adjunct in Cincinnati State for many, many years, teaching some programming classes. This is an email I got, and it was sent to, I think, every Cincinnati State account. I have a son that's a student there. He got this same email, and he actually called me and said, hey, Dad, I got this thing. What is this? Is this real? You can see actual real, this is a real agency. These are real graphics they stole. If you read this, there's no obvious tells in this email. There's nothing in here that stands out to me as this is obviously fraudulent, other than the fact that I'm not a student. So why in the world would I get a $2,321 loan from FAFSA, right? It doesn't make any sense to me, but to the average student there, this is very realistic looking. And I'm, again, if I were in the room, I'd say like, who would look at this and think that this is obviously fake? They did a very good job of spoofing this. And it's very, very easy to do that, unfortunately. So that's why it's so important that you maintain skepticism. Malware, viruses, ransomware, all that stuff is still out there. Ransomware is a huge problem. I mentioned earlier, the record ransom known to date is now $30 million. The ransoms have gone up. The bad guys are making gigantic amounts of money at this. I see this all the time. I get calls regularly from companies who are not customers of Intrust, but have been hit with ransomware and trying to figure out what to do. If you don't have a good backup, you got a major problem on your hands, but I'll get to that in a minute. Open ports. Everyone rushed home to work during the pandemic, okay? In many cases, to maintain access to their systems at work, they had to open up holes in the network to allow people in. Bad guys have tools that will literally just scan. They're just literally scanning the internet, finding machines that are connected, and then trying to find open ports they can exploit. One of the main ways you get ransomware outside of phishing and attachments to phishing emails is an open port. They find the port open, they go through that port, they drop the ransomware in your network, and then it goes to work. Open ports are bad, and there's a simple way to control those. Free software, another huge problem. So many people, because of something they see on social media, or their friend tells them, hey, I got this great new app. They just go download something for free. They don't do any research on it. They have no idea who's behind it. And a couple stats here, because I'll get to some ways you can vet these things. 172 malicious apps hosted on Google Play were installed more than 335 million times in September of 2019 and have been found in the Apple Store too. These were ultimately removed. You got to keep in mind, while Apple is generally much more stringent around security and privacy and what they'll allow in their store, you're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of these things, new things coming out all the time. It's a gigantic task for them to try to verify those things. If you just go out and download the first thing you find for free without doing any research, you're just asking for trouble. And even if it's not necessarily malicious, the amount of information you're giving up, because again, if you're not paying with money, you're paying with data. Believe it or not, software engineers, for the most part, don't just build this stuff out of the goodness of their heart. If you're not paying up front, you're paying in your data. They're monetizing your data somehow. Again, not necessarily bad, but you need to understand that trade-off. They're not really free. And if you're not doing any homework on that, that's a problem. Social media. I mean, I know Dan recently had another gentleman in to talk about some of these issues. I use social media. I use it in a very controlled way. And I'll get to some of the things you can do about that in a minute. But understand, the more information you put out there, not only especially if you have social media apps on your phone, are they sucking up every piece of information you could possibly imagine? And I'll show you in a second. The more information you put out there, when you take that quiz that asks you what's your favorite color and where you went to high school and so forth, in many cases, those are the same questions you get asked when you forget your password somewhere. Some of these quizzes are absolutely fraudulent, and they're trying to get your information because they know you probably have a bad password, and they know they can use that information to crack your accounts. Less information is better. Put out as little as possible. You'll be much better off. Public Wi-Fi. If you're going to McDonald's, if you're going to Panera and you're using their public Wi-Fi, you're just asking for disaster. Unless you understand how to secure your connection, unless you understand what a secure connection looks like, and I would say even if you're using a VPN, if it's not configured right, you may still be at risk. Don't use public Wi-Fi. I never use public Wi-Fi. Even though I have a VPN, and I'll talk about that specifically in a second, a virtual private network, I never, ever, ever use public Wi-Fi. If I'm out somewhere and I need to get on the internet, I'm going to use the data capabilities of my phone, either use the phone to get on the internet or the hotspot on the phone to connect my computer. Public Wi-Fi is a recipe for disaster for the average person because they don't know how to keep it secure. And then we'll get back to my old friend here, the Internet of Things. This was a story from today in ZDNet. Your insecure Internet of Things devices are putting everyone at risk of attack because people are just plugging this stuff in and they don't understand how it can be misused. And again, there's so many issues with this. How do you keep it updated? How do you set it up correctly? How do you keep it secure over time? What happens when I'm guessing most people out here in the audience tonight probably have a coffee maker. And my guess is you don't replace it all that often. So when you go out tomorrow and buy a smart coffee maker, do you think 5 years from now, the vendor that made that thing will still be putting out software patches for it? Do you think 5 years from now, the bad guys will be using sites like Shodan to find your coffee maker, which is now insecure, and hack it? Yes, they will. That is one of their major tactics. They look for older equipment that isn't being updated. So the IoT is just a huge problem in and of itself. The term was coined back in '99 by Kevin Ashton. And it's basically, without reading all this stuff to you, any so-called smart device that has sensors and can be connected to the internet, or at least a network, is essentially an Internet of Things device or a smart device. I mentioned before, it's kind of a dumpster fire. I think this is kind of funny. Can I interest you in a firewall for your toaster? Here's a story about how bad guys stole millions of dollars from a casino because the casino had aquariums that had smart heaters in them. The bad guys found those heaters. They weren't set up right. They used those to break into the casino's network and steal millions of dollars. It's a fascinating story. And it's one of the things people don't think that, okay, how are the bad guys going to exploit these devices? But this kind of thing is happening all the time. Mikko Hyppinen, well-known cybersecurity expert, essentially said, the Internet of Things as it stands today is like asbestos. When asbestos first came out, everyone thought it was this miracle material. It was going to do all these great things for society. And we found that over time, that wasn't the case. He said, the IoT revolution is taking everything else online, and eventually anything that uses electricity will be online. Sadly, I think that's probably true. And I think we'll come to a point in the future where many of the problems I'm calling out now will be resolved. But where we stand today, the more of these so-called smart devices you have, the more trouble you have on your hands. And then I like to tell people, D2, disconnect and discard this stuff. You're just asking for trouble. So what can you do to protect yourself, right? I know it feels a little bit like this, right? You're getting sprayed in the face with this water cannon as I'm giving you all this bad news and going to give you all this information. But there are a lot of things you can do. And fortunately, you don't have to turn everything off, right? I think this is kind of funny, right? How I secured everything? Well, I turned it all off. That is one way to go about it, but you don't have to do that. So what can you do? Okay, the flip side of I'm not installing the patches, you have to update your software on all of your devices. Whether it's your car, your smart TV, your router, your Internet of Things refrigerator, your desktop operating system, your web browser, you have got to install the updates on that. The good news is, in most cases, it's never been easier. If you use Windows 10, you can set it up to update automatically. Firefox, for example, the browser I like because it's privacy friendly, will update itself. If you don't know how to do these things, the good news is there are people who can help you. And there's all kinds of online resources that can give you guidance for how to do this. the first thing is to understand you need to do it. If you install anything that's got software in it, eventually, if you're dealing with a reputable manufacturer, there will be updates you need to apply. You got to install the updates, and you got to do it as soon as possible, because the bad guys will exploit these things. When the vendors put out patches, the sooner you can install them, the better. Okay, password hygiene or credential management, credential hygiene. I talked about this before. I know people don't want to hear I need a different password for every account. I know people don't want to hear that I need a password that looks like this because you can't remember it. I totally understand that. I know that's frustrating, right? But there are many things you can do. The first of which is, if you don't want to use a password manager, which I would recommend, and I'm going to get to here in a second, you can use passphrases, right? Come up with a phrase that only you would know, that someone couldn't guess. Longer is better. You can see here, I love pizza with onions, right? Got some substitutions in here, the number 0 instead of the letter O, the ampersand instead of the A. If someone couldn't guess that about you, that would be a very, very difficult password to crack. But because it's a phrase, it's easy to remember versus some mumbo jumbo like this. So that's one thing you can do. You need a unique and strong password for every account. Strong password, at least 8 characters. Longer is always better. Something that can't be found in a dictionary, right? There's some guidance here. Use a passphrase, but ideally use a password manager. There are many good, cheap, or free password managers out there. I like LastPass. They've just recently changed their policy. Now you have to pay depending on how you want to use it. Dashlane, RoboForm, Keeper, there are many. I'm going to give you some resources at the end of this for how you can vet these things and find something that'll work for you. Use a password manager. With a quality product like LastPass, it's on my phone, it's on my tablet, it's on all my computers. It syncs across all of them. So if I add a password in one, it shows up everywhere. It's very secure. I have a very secure password, so I only need to remember one password, the password for the password manager, and I have multi-factor authentication turned on. It would be very, very difficult to crack my password manager. Makes it easy for me to create very strong passwords. Most of my passwords look like that. I don't know what they are. I don't care what they are. The password manager handles that for me. Use a password manager. Multi-factor authentication. If you do the first 3 things here, you will be more secure than 90% of the people out there, and you will be very, very difficult to hack. Multi-factor authentication, sometimes called 2-factor authentication or 2-step verification. Microsoft and Google have both said it'll stop 99% of all automated attacks. If this sounds like mumbo jumbo to you, my guess is many of you have already experienced it with your bank or your insurance company. You go to log in addition to a username and password, it wants to text you a code, a 6-digit code, one-time passcode like you see in this screenshot here, right? 840194. Typically, you have somewhere between 30 seconds to a minute and a half to enter that before that changes. But even if the bad guys get your username and password, they still can't log into your account because they need that code. If you don't do anything else tonight besides stop, think, protect, just turning on multi-factor authentication will make your accounts much, much, much more difficult to hack into. And I can tell you from working with our clients, we see all the time where attempts to hack into someone's email account are blocked because the bad guys can't get around the 2-factor authentication prompting. Endpoint protection, you need some kind of antivirus or anti-malware software. Unfortunately, we nerds like to call the same thing different names. Endpoint protection, antivirus, anti-malware, it's all essentially the same thing. Gartner is a well-known industry group where they rank this sort of stuff. You can see here, this is in reference to Microsoft Defender. It's free, right? It's already in Windows 10. You just got to make sure it's turned on. These are other quality products. Generally for our corporate clients, we use SentinelOne. It's very advanced, doesn't make sense for the average person. But even if you just use Defender, as you can see here, Gartner is saying it's a top-notch product. It's better than nothing. Turn it on, right? And then make sure you're installing the updates. Again, that new virus definitions are coming out all the time. The antivirus software is being improved. You got to make sure that's being updated just like the other software on your devices. Firewall. Windows 10 comes with a built-in firewall. The firewall does things like close those open ports we talked about. It makes it more difficult for the hackers to get into your device or devices. You got to make sure that's turned on. There are third-party firewalls. You can get a hardware firewall that will protect your entire network. That's a little too technical probably for this conversation. But at a minimum, if you're on a Windows-based machine, make sure the firewall is turned on. And yeah, this may seem a little technical, but there are ample and free resources from reputable places, which I'm going to show you in a second, where you can learn how to do these things. Okay. You don't have to be a nerd like me. You can look this stuff up. Virtual private network. Should you use a VPN? In almost every case, yes. Especially if you're going to be using any network other than one you have control over. Okay, virtual private network basically creates an encrypted channel. So your data going from here to there is encrypted. Okay, that's in the best way I can just explain it in simple terms. It also creates some anonymity for you. It helps improve your privacy. There are many quality products out there. Nord is probably one of the most well-known products. I use it for my personal stuff. For our work account, we have an enterprise grade VPN. But I wanted to point out, again, many people say, oh, old nerdy Dave told me I need a VPN. So I go search, and the first thing I find on Google or whatever, I download that thing. Okay, well, here's a story. Google pulls Super VPN from the Play Store, urged users to delete it. It was basically malware. It was stealing people's information. It was more or less a virus purporting to be a VPN, kind of the exact opposite of what it was supposed to do. It is absolutely critical that you do your research and you only get stuff from quality, well-known vendors. Again, I'm going to show you how to do that in a second. Here's a couple of other quality products. Like I say, I use Nord personally. It works well. It's inexpensive, and it's well worth it. But there are other quality products out there as well. Encryption. Use encryption everywhere you can. I know I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to try to make sure I get through all of this and then take whatever questions you have. Windows 10 comes with built-in encryption for the data on that computer. Turn it on. If you use Office 365, you can, depending on the licensing you have, and for a very nominal cost, if you don't have the right licensing, get the capability to encrypt your email, right? Make sure when you're browsing on the web, you look for websites that have encryption turned on. Keep in mind, from a web browser standpoint, just because you see that locker HTTPS does not mean the site itself is reputable. It just means it's using encryption. But when you don't see that, it guarantees to you that the data that's being sent from your device to that web server could potentially be exploited. So you want to see that lock, but just because there's a lock there does not mean the site itself is legitimate. Bad guys will spoof a site. They'll, go out and steal Frame USA's website, set it up on another site, register a name that looks similar. They'll get a certificate so you see that lock, so you believe you're on a legitimate site. And that's why I say I know it's hard to hear, but it's more and more difficult all the time to know what's real and what's not real. And that's why you have to be so careful. Your router, you have a router in your house, in your office network, whatever, that's ultimately making it possible for you to get on the internet. You need to change the default password. As a bad guy, I can go to the manufacturer's website and look up the password if you haven't changed it. You need to make sure that you're using the highest possible level of encryption it supports. Right now, that's WPA2. You need to make sure you're installing the updates for that router. In many newer ones, you can configure it. Notice this is mine. It's set to auto update. If an update shows up, it'll download it on its own. You got to do that kind of thing. There are sites out there like Shields Up that will let you scan your network from the outside and give you feedback on where it sees vulnerabilities. Again, that's a good way to get some feedback about where your defenses may be down. And then if you don't know how to plug those holes, you can find a nerd like me that can help. Vet software carefully. I've talked about this a couple of times. Don't just download the first thing you find. There are many reputable sites, and I've got links at the end of this. ZDNet, CNET, PC Magazine, Consumer Reports, Tom's Guide, where they have editors and experts who are constantly evaluating software and rating software. If you go right now to DuckDuckGo and search on best VPN of 2020 or best VPN of 2021, you'll find articles on every site I just mentioned, and they'll rate these things. My advice would be, if you find a common theme, if Nord shows up in the top 5 on every site, and probably it's going to show up as 1 or 2 on every site, that's a good choice. Web browser, if you do a search, I'm going to say don't use Chrome no matter what you do. But if you do a search and 3 out of 5 sites say Firefox, then use Firefox, right? Don't just download the first thing you find. Do your homework. Hardening. Hardening is geek speak for doing things to make your systems more difficult to break into. We've already covered some of them. Others are a lot more technical. The good news is there are sites like CIS out here where they publish benchmarks that you can use to make your systems more difficult to break into. They do get kind of technical. It's the nerdier you are, the more sensible this will be. But this, my point is, there are many free or very, very low cost resources out there you can take advantage of. Backup. I mentioned before, the best defense against ransomware, other than obviously just not getting it, is have a good backup. If you have a good backup that you can restore from, there's no reason to pay the ransom, right? You just simply restore from backup after you've cleaned the ransomware off and move on. The good news is this has never been easier either. Whether you go to Best Buy and you buy a big old hard disk that you can plug in, back up and unplug, or you use a cloud-based backup. If you are on Office 365, right? If you have a Microsoft subscription, you can use OneDrive to back your stuff up for free. It's cloud-based. Microsoft is backing that up. So again, I've got some other tools listed here. It's never been easier to do, but you got to do it because once the ransomware hits, it's too late. You got to have a backup. Look at cloud services. You can use things like Office 365, put your data in their cloud. It's going to be much more secure, assuming you do things like have strong passwords and use multi-factor authentication. You know, here's some general defenses, security education and training awareness. This stuff is changing constantly. The bad guys know that the average person doesn't understand this stuff. They don't want to understand it. And you've got to try to stay on top of it. And that's, again, I appreciate Dan giving me this opportunity. Sanitize your old equipment. Before you get rid of a computer or a tablet or frankly, anything that has software inside it, you should think long and hard about the data that could be in there. And would you want that to fall into the hands of someone that might use it in a way that you would not appreciate? You know, don't just throw a computer in the garbage. Don't just give a computer away, particularly if it might have financial information or other personal information that can be used. There are e-cycling companies that will take your e-waste and certify that they have sanitized it, wiped it in a way that the data can't be recovered. There are all kinds of resources like that out there. You just have to know to look. And then choose privacy. So again, I'm going to reiterate, stop, think, protect. I'm going to hit a couple privacy things here, and I'll kind of wrap up and take your questions. Choose privacy. You can make a conscious decision today that you're going to take steps towards improving and protecting your privacy. Okay. First off, anything from Facebook is bad. You should ditch it immediately. And in my opinion, I'm going to tell you the same thing about Google, right? Anytime you see that Facebook hates something, that's a sign that it's good. I used to be an Android person. I switched to Apple about 3 years ago simply because they have made a conscious decision to lean more towards privacy and security than anyone else out there. Are they perfect? No. Could they change tomorrow? Yes. But in general, the Apple iOS platform on phones is much more secure, and you have a much better chance of maintaining some semblance of privacy than on anything else that's currently out there. Apple is a product company. Are they collecting data about you? Yes. Are they trying to monetize that data? So far, they are not. That's how Google makes all their money. I mean, their models are entirely different, okay? So again, I'm telling you, ditch Android, use iOS. Yes, I know some of their equipment is more expensive, but if you care about privacy, using anything from Google is, you're basically blowing your own foot off. Ditch Chrome. Again, Google product. It's the most popular web browser out there. I use Firefox mostly. I have Brave, played with a little bit. Tor, if you want real privacy, Tor is the way to go. The problem with Tor is it often breaks many websites when you try to use it. So Firefox is probably the most reasonable alternative out there. And when you see this guy here, this is showing you one of the things Apple recently did, again, on that privacy front, is they're saying, hey, now if you want to put an app in our store, you have to tell consumers what data you're going to collect, and you have to give them the opportunity to opt out. That'll be coming in the next version of iOS. You can say, that's nice. I want to use your app anyway, and I'm not going to give you my data. Now, I think ultimately that'll change the whole model of how data is monetized. But just take a look at this. So this is DuckDuckGo, their app and their browser for using their search engine. This is what data they collect. This is the data that Google is collecting. Okay. And if I have time and we get the question answered, I'll show you some interesting things from the Apple Store, just comparing different apps side by side and what they're collecting. And if you want to be in the Apple Store, you now must provide this information. So Apple is doing a huge favor to everyone out there. This is what Chrome is collecting. Okay. If you look at Firefox, it basically collects nothing. And you know, here's an example now. Google's being sued because even though when you're supposedly in incognito mode, they're not tracking you. There are experts who are saying they are. I like Firefox. Any of these are a good choice. Firefox makes the most sense for most people. You can then extend the privacy and security capabilities of Firefox by using certain extensions. Electronic Frontier Foundation, a leader in privacy. They have some extensions like Privacy Badger that tries to block cookies. Firefox is already doing an amazing job of that. Firefox has one of their own browser extensions to basically shut Facebook down completely from collecting data about you. But again, before you just install any of these things, you've got to understand who's behind them, where they're coming from. Many of these browser extensions are basically malware. So don't just install the first thing you run across. Do your homework, talk to a nerd like me, whatever. You can see I've got these two are from EFF. That's my LastPass plugin for my password manager. And this is the DuckDuckGo privacy browser extension. Again, choose privacy, ditch Gmail. I don't use Gmail. I have a Gmail account still. I don't really do anything with it anymore. I use Proton Mail. It's got end-to-end encryption. This is showing you from the Apple store and the privacy labels. This is what Proton Mail collects. This is what Gmail collects. And there was just a story in Forbes yesterday basically saying you should stop using Gmail because they're sucking up all this information about you. Here's some other things you can do. Again, don't use the Google search engine, use DuckDuckGo. No, it's not as good. But if you want to maintain your privacy, I would say it's 75% as good and you get to maintain your privacy. Use a VPN. In addition to giving you security, it will help improve your privacy by essentially making you anonymous out on the sites you visit and so forth. Don't use Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp. Both Facebook products use Signal. Signal has end-to-end encryption. People like Elon Musk and Edward Snowden recommend Signal. Don't use Dropbox, use Sync. Again, it's not tracking you. Ditch smart assistants. Every time you turn around, there's some story about Alexa and these other smart assistants where they're sucking up all kinds of information about you. Big story recently about how the skills that extend Alexa's capability, of 90,000 of them that were surveyed, only 24% of them had any kind of privacy policy at all, meaning anything you do with them, they're collecting all of that. And then, last but least, use sites, as I mentioned before, PC Magazine, CNET, ZDNet, Consumer Reports, to vet this stuff. Don't just go find something on your own. Again, be skeptical and use these reputable sites to get guidance for how you can do these things in a way that keeps you private and secure. Here's some of the tools I talked about. Windows Defender for antivirus. Firefox is a browser. Nord for a VPN. OpenDNS is, it gives you a way to sort of shield the sites you're visiting. Use BitLocker in Windows. Use a password manager. I like LastPass. I'm willing to pay for LastPass. I do pay for LastPass. But there are other equally good choices, some of which are free. These are the articles I mentioned. I would strongly encourage each of you to read these things and consider what they have to say about privacy and why it is important and why the mentality of I have nothing to hide doesn't make sense anymore. A couple takeaways. If you're not paying with money, you're paying with data. Your data is valuable. Fortunately, and I rarely would look to California for any guidance on anything, but the California Consumer Privacy Act has some very strong privacy legislation. Other states have similar things in the works. So I think we're getting real close there. You can make choices to limit your footprint. Less is more. So here's some resources you can follow for a lot more of this type of information. I'm putting out a steady stream of this stuff. You can follow me on Twitter. Here's links to many of the things I talked about here tonight. So that'll get you started. And then I'll be happy to answer whatever questions you have.
I just really want to thank you for just an incredible presentation, Dave. I mean, I wrote down kind of 12 steps of things I need to look at. I just encourage people, before we take questions and answers, for your people out there that use devices, which is almost everybody, send them a copy of this video. It'll be up live tomorrow at about 4 o'clock, and you can just take your time and go through it. So we have some people who are calling in to talk. Dave, you want to take a few phone calls?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go ahead and try to hear from Dan. Can we get Dan on the line? Dan, are you there?
Oh, yeah, I am.
Just turn your mute
okay.
your Zoom, and we'll be fine.
Okay, there you go. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Dave, great show. This is incredible stuff.
Thank you.
Question. We have an iPhone and an iMac computer, and this has happened twice within the last year. The last time was we were talking about a rare bourbon that we wanted to get, and thought we'd go to the store in a couple of days and look to see if they had it. And lo and behold, later that night, I'm online and I'm just looking at the news, this particular, well, it was Breitbart News, and there's ads that come up on the site online, and lo and behold, it was that bourbon, and it's a very unique bourbon. And I thought, how in the world, what's the coincidence of this happening? So does my iPhone, do they actually listen and get that information?
Well, here would be my answer, Dan. First off, as a native Kentuckian, I'm a bourbon fan myself, so you're going to have to enlighten me on this rare bourbon you're talking about. But, you know,
you've got the right guy, I think.
Yeah, Facebook and all these people claim they're not listening to you. Now, keep in mind that if you're using any kind of voice assistant, whether it's Amazon Alexa, Siri on an iPhone, Cortana on the Microsoft platform, or whatever it is, right? OK Google, or whatever they call that thing now. By default, it has to listen to you in order for you to say the wake word for it to do whatever it is you're asking it to do, right? And, you know, I'm one of those nerdy people. I didn't really talk about this. Like on my phone, I have the location services turned off until I need to use them. So if I'm going to use the map, I'll turn the location services on. I go where I'm going to go, then I turn it off. I turn the Bluetooth off on my phone and I turn it on. So my answer is, I can't honestly say, without being able to evaluate the proprietary code inside there, you know, they all claim they're not listening to you. And there are many credible explanations for how what you've described happens. For example, you know, you went to a website and it knows you like bourbon because you've talked about bourbon on Facebook or whatever else. I mean, there are credible explanations, but I've heard many stories like what you just described. And there are many people online, if you go look, who claim they've had experiences where they swear there is absolutely no way that, other than a conversation they had, an extemporaneous conversation, next thing you know, they start getting ads. You know, they all swear they don't do it, but I honestly can't answer that. It's certainly possible. You know, there's case law, or not case law, but cases out there in court where the FBI has activated people's cameras, activated people's microphones, and, you know, people are in jail as a result. It's certainly possible. I honestly can't answer that. I don't know.
Isn't it possible too? It could have just been part of a remarketing campaign.
Dan. I mean, keep in mind that, you know, as you travel around the web, if you're not using these privacy-friendly tools like VPNs and Firefox and taking steps to control your privacy, limit the cookies and so forth, you know, while if you had some very unique bourbon that was not very well known, I think that's unlikely that they would somehow target that. Keep in mind, if you haven't seen it, so I want to throw something else out here. If you have not seen The Social Dilemma, the movie about all this social media stuff, I cannot strongly encourage you enough to watch it. One of the things they talk about in detail in that movie is Cambridge Analytica and the big scandal that created for Facebook. Cambridge Analytica claimed that they had 5,000 pieces of information on every person that was in their data set, which was something like 80 million people. If I knew 5,000 pieces of information about you, I could infer all kinds of things, especially if I had some really smart algorithms to process that data. So Dan, I honestly can't say it's not happening. They all claim it's not happening. I think it would be a huge problem on their hands if it were happening, but there are many examples like the one you just gave that are very difficult to explain.
Dave, we've got a couple of questions. Thanks for the call, Dan, tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
If wants to call, please call 513-572-1266 and we'll get you on with Dave. We have some questions online from Tom. If you set up a 2FA for your accounts, as you should, using your phone as the authenticator, and you lose your phone or is it destroyed, how do you get back into those accounts?
Good question. So first off, what he's asking about, so 2FA, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, typically there are several different ways you can get that code, the one-time passcode, right? The most common way for most people is you get it via text. So when you go to log in, you get a text that sends you a 6-digit code and you have so much time to enter that. Okay, there has been a lot of recent studies done around this, and it's well known. There's something called a SIM jacking attack where I could potentially call your cell phone carrier, pretend to be you, right? I impersonate you, I spoof you, often with information I find out about you online, right? Okay, what's your birth date? Well, I can probably easily find that for most people. What's your address? You know, all those kinds of questions you might get asked to verify your identity and authenticate yourself, I can find online. So I call Verizon, I pretend to be you. I have your cell phone number swapped to my phone. And again, probably many people, if not most people, have had to get a new phone at some point and had that number transferred. Well, again, in the industry, it's called SIM swapping or SIM jacking. So now I have your number transferred to my phone, and now your two-factor authentication codes are coming to my phone. That's rare, unless I'm some sort of high-value target. That's not going to happen to the average person. But there are more studies showing that SMS or text is not good for 2FA or MFA versus an authenticator app. So I would recommend you use an authenticator app. There are good ones like Authy. Microsoft has one. So to answer that question specifically, most of those, when you configure them, will let you back up your accounts. With something like Authy, it has a PC version, it has a phone version, it has a tablet version. So if you have Authy installed on multiple devices, you already sort of have a backup because the data is on those multiple devices. And in most cases, like LastPass also has an authenticator. When you set it up, you would have to know this going into it, but you can create one-time codes. So like literally, it will give you a sheet of 10 one-time codes. You can print that out and put it in a desk drawer or a safe or something. So if you do get locked out of your authenticator account, you can use one of those codes one time to get back in. So there are mechanisms that will allow you to recover if that happens, because that is a concern and it can be a huge problem. I hope, did that answer the question, I hope?
Yeah, I think that you did a good job on that, Dave. So I've got an anonymous question from an attendee. Why would you give the cloud your personal data when you can use an external hard drive? The company that hosts the cloud server and NSA can access it.
What makes you think they haven't accessed it off the computer that you had it on before you plugged that drive in? You know, I mean, I think that's a legitimate question. And I would say, you know, depending on your tolerance for privacy, your appetite for risk, and your necessity to be able to restore that data. You know, so to answer that question specifically, you plug a drive in, you back up to it, that's great. What happens when your house burns down? What happens when a tornado hits and your equipment is, you know, sent to the four winds? At the same time, you may have information you might not want to put in the cloud. There are secure cloud options where they use what's known as zero knowledge encryption. That's the way LastPass works. Your passwords are not stored in LastPass in the way they can read them. They're encrypted on your device based on the key, your password, your master password that only you know. When those passwords hit LastPass's server, they can't decrypt them either. They don't know what they are. There are backup services that work like that as well. So your data is encrypted and stored in a way that they can't read it themselves either. Could the NSA break that encryption? Maybe. So, I mean, again, it depends on your risk tolerance and how sensitive you are to these things. But the main benefit of cloud-based backup is, A, you have a copy somewhere else off-site. So if your physical site is destroyed, you have it somewhere else. And B, in many cases, people will plug those drives in kind of forget about it, leave it plugged in, and then the ransomware encrypts that as well. So if you have a truly cloud-based backup and it's configured correctly, it will be impossible or damn near impossible for that to get hit with ransomware. So hopefully that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, Maya wanted to know, where can I find info on how to secure my router?
Well, the best place to start probably is just to have a general understanding of how it works and to make sure that you're installing the updates from the vendor. And then more specifically, because here's one of the problems with all of this stuff for non-technical people. You know, at the end of the day, what a router does is the same no matter who makes the router, but exactly how you configure it, exactly what they call things, exactly what screen you got to navigate to do it is going to be different, right? Even within the same manufacturer, one model to another might be a little different. And what I call multi-factor authentication, that might call two-step verification. So I realize that's a bit tricky for people who aren't nerds like me. And even if you're in this business, it's tricky because different people call it different things. But the best thing is probably, again, have a high level understanding that there's software in there you need to update. You need to change the default password. You need to use the highest level of encryption that it supports. And then outside of that, you really need to go to the manufacturer's website and read about the particular model that you have. And then again, just general help online around how to secure Wi-Fi routers and that sort of thing.
And for those of us who have forgotten how to connect to their router, Dave, how do you connect
well,
to it?
Even that is problematic, Dan, and that's one of the big problems with a lot of IoT devices. In many cases, unlike a computer where it has a keyboard and a screen and you kind of understand how to work with it, most of these devices don't have a keyboard, they don't have a screen. It's not obvious to a not regular person. How do you update the software on your Nest thermostat? Here's how it works in almost all cases, but even this will vary somewhat. Most of the time, these devices will have a built-in web server. So you would open your browser, go to Firefox, and you would type in the IP address of that device. So most routers will typically have an IP address like 192.168.0.1 or .1.1 or something. It will be in the documentation that comes with the device. So you're going to connect to that address. It'll ask you for a username and password. And then you'll have a web-based interface that allows you to control that device and do things like change the password, update the software, that sort of thing. But 99% of the time, you're going to have to know the IP address of that device on your network. And you're going to have to know how to navigate to it in a web browser and go from there. So you really are going to have to read the manufacturer's instructions on how to do that.
So the manual will tell you what that
should, yes. And or typically you can go to the manufacturer's website and get all that information.
I think Lynette is really asking a good question. At what point do I need a VPN? Does the average person need one? And would you repeat the benefits?
Yeah, so VPN, virtual private network, it creates an encrypted tunnel, which does two things for you. It keeps the data that's going through that tunnel encrypted and difficult to access. And I would argue impossible in most cases. And it creates privacy and anonymity for you because no one else can read that data. And you can do things like when I connect to Nord, I can connect to a server in, let's say, Belgium. Okay, so my data is going from Fort Wright, Kentucky, or Blue Ash, where my office is, to Belgium first before it goes to wherever it's going to go. So when it leaves the servers in Belgium, wherever it's going, they think I'm in Belgium. They don't know that I'm in Fort Wright, Kentucky. They don't know the IP address that I'm using. It makes it very difficult to trace that back to me. So it's securing your data, assuming it's configured right, and it's providing a certain amount of anonymity. One of the reasons why people like it is, Netflix, if you're in the UK, gives you different offerings. Okay, I can hit a server in the UK, and when I connect to Netflix, I'll get a lot of different stuff than I have access to here in the United States.
So Dave, one of the questions about a VPN that I think a lot of people struggle with is, how much does it slow things down?
Well, that's a good question. And so let me back up one step and say, so for the average person, if you're only working from your home network and you don't really care about privacy, a VPN isn't going to buy you that much. But I'd also add, they're generally pretty expensive. I'm paying like $56 a year for Nord. It's well worth it, in my opinion, for $56 a year. And there are others that are cheaper than Nord, and based on the ratings of people that know what they're doing, tell you they're just as good. How much will it slow you down? It does slow things down because you're adding in a lot of extra layers, right? The data has to be encrypted. It's getting bounced to another server out there somewhere. So you are adding overhead. From my own personal experience, and I think there's a perception that it's a lot slower than it is, because in the old days when computers were slower and networks were slower, you felt that impact a lot more. I would suggest for most people, if you have a high bandwidth internet connection and you have a relatively fast computer, it will not, in most cases, even be noticeable that you have it turned on.
Great. Trevor wants to know, how do you rank MS Edge to, like, you've been clear about Firefox. Thank you for that, because that clarity is going to help me. How would you rate MS Edge?
I would say, first off, if you're still using Microsoft Internet Explorer, you should stop using that immediately because it's just a security dumpster fire. I would say even Chrome would be better than Internet Explorer. I would use Edge over Chrome. I would use just about anything over Chrome. Google is in the business of collecting your data. That's how they make all their money. Anything you're using from Google, they are monetizing your data, period. Is that bad? I'll leave that to you to decide, but I have tried to remove everything from Google from my life. I would say Edge is better than Chrome. I would say Firefox is better than Edge. Brave is better than Edge. The main reason why people don't like Firefox or Brave is sometimes they'll have compatibility issues. I think a lot of that has been ironed out over time. Tor is the ultimate browser from a privacy and security standpoint, but what you're going to find is it is slow because it's essentially doing a VPN-like thing in the background. And a lot of websites will just flat break because it's so restrictive. It's just, you just can't do what you need to do.
So Dave, at EmpoweU people, we're not real big fans on Facebook, Twitter, Google. How hard was it for you to break away from Google?
It wasn't that hard, because what I found is like DuckDuckGo. Again, as I said, I think you'll find the search results aren't as good, but they're good enough in most cases for me, and they don't track you. And I'm trying to choke Google and Facebook and these people of data, right? So to me, it's worth it. Will I occasionally still go back and use Google if I need something that I can't find any other way? Yeah, I will, but I'm also using it in Firefox. So I'm locking down the amount of things that they can track about me. I still have a Facebook account. I use it to promote stuff like this, and I use it to promote city-related stuff. I use Facebook probably less than 1/10 the amount that I used to. I use it in Firefox where it's extremely restricted. I don't use the Facebook app and haven't for years. I don't use any apps from Facebook. And the only thing I use from Facebook is the original Facebook website. So that these are the kind of steps you can take. I'm not saying you simply have to divest yourself of everything. But even if you do want to maintain some kind of presence in these places, by doing things like using a VPN, by doing things like using Firefox and cranking its privacy restrictions to the max, you are choking off the vast majority of data they can collect about you that you don't explicitly give them. Yeah, if I go post something on Facebook, they know that, but that's about all they're getting out of me at this point.
Yeah. Betty has the question, if Cincinnati Bell owns your router, aren't they updating it?
Not necessarily. Again, it would depend on the router itself and whether it's configured to get updates or not.
A couple people asked, is your slide deck available for us to post online?
Yeah, I'll email it to you and you can put it out there.
It'll be up on line under the class name. We appreciate that. That'll answer Deb's question about the LOT cartoon, which was LOI cartoon, which was funny. So just a couple more, and I know we're getting late. Michael asked the question, 5G technology, do you like it? What are the hazards or benefits?
Okay, so I'm going to be honest here. I'm not an expert on it. You know, I've heard all the arguments, how it's going to cook us all and so forth. And I will just say this. I have not seen anything that, in my opinion, is credible about those threats. And it doesn't make a lot of sense for people to cook their customers because then there's no one to pay them. So I'm not saying it's safe. I'm not saying it's unsafe. I'm just saying I personally have not seen anything that, in my opinion, is credible enough for me to be concerned about it. We've been getting bombarded with radio frequencies for decades, my entire life, right? You know, could we find out? I'll go back to what Mikko Hyppinen said about asbestos. Could we find somewhere down the road that these things are bad? Perhaps. I'm not entirely sold that it's 100% safe, but I don't spend any time worrying about it, Dan. I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
Jennifer wanted to know, are you able to speak about the ID 2020 Alliance Technocracy, the Great Reset? Do you know anything about that?
ID 2020? No, I don't. I've never even heard that term before.
Okay. And we had a comment from an anonymous attendee. I'd suggest, unlike Google, DuckDuckGo does not curate your results based on the data they've collected from you, which is a great thing. Dave Hatter, we're so appreciative of you spending so much of your time. And I hear that Fort Wright is kind of like the Belgium of the Midwest, right? So everybody, when we go down to Fort Wright, Dave, give us just a flavor of what we should find.
Well, the best way I can explain it, so I'm a lifer. I've lived in Fort Wright my whole life, greater Cincinnati region my whole life. My dad has lived in the same house here since 1956. I would tell you it's a lot like the West Side. In fact, I jokingly tell people all the time, it's the Southwest Side. Everyone's Catholic. No one ever leaves. Everybody knows everyone else. So, you know, if you like the West Side, you're going to fit in really well in Fort Wright. And, you know, for the most part, we try to spend as little of people's money as possible and leave people alone. That's kind of the mentality. Got some great iconic businesses like Waltz. If you're looking for a good steak, some great ribs, come down to Waltz. Walt Kitchen Post. Love the place. One of my favorites. You know, it's just I had no intention of living my entire life here. I had no intention of being the mayor. It all just kind of happened, but it's a great place to be.
Well, you are a great person to join us tonight. And Dave Hatter, thank you so much. And we'll put all your information online. People can rewatch it. Thank you so much for joining EmpoweU tonight. We really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Dan. Thanks. And, you know, tune in to 55 KRC, sometimes WLW, Fox 19. I'm constantly trying to put this stuff out so people can protect themselves and their families and their organizations. So
and it'll be an early morning for you tomorrow morning on Brian's show. Tell them we said hello, okay?
I will do that. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you all coming, and stay safe out there.
Thank you very much, Dave Hatter. We appreciate it. Just a few quick things before we go. Deb, thanks for the friend request on MeWe. Dave Hatter's a great person to get this information out to the public. For those of you who didn't hear today, just out of interest, Dan Bongino will be taking over a lot of the stations for Rush Limbaugh. I thought that was interesting. And Larry T, you're the winner of the gift card to Frame USA on frameusa.com. So I just want to end tonight real quick with an Empowered Citizen Award. You know, we like to end the show with those, just people that I think have done interesting. Tonight will be a surprise for many of you probably, because I'm going to award this Empowered Citizen Award to the Queen of England, Elizabeth II. I think she's an empowered citizen. Gosh, anybody that could put up with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry surely deserves something. Can you imagine your husband, Philip, 99 years old, on his dying bed, and you have a member of your family calling you a racist and saying all those terrible things about you? I can't even imagine it. And as I looked at the Queen, I thought it was interesting for those of you who don't know much about her. She's 94 years old. She was born in April of 1926, the first child of the Duke and Duchess of York. Her father was King of England in 1936. She married her husband, Philip, in 1947. Her father died in 1952, and she was coronated as queen in 1953. It's an amazing story. She is the longest lived and longest reigning British monarch. She has served 69 years. I just think that that's a pretty cool thing, because if you look at the Queen over the years, and these pictures are just kind of astonishing to me, you see the vibe of a steady leader that's just been filled with so much grace, and the coolness that she handled that whole royal mess. It's a good message for us to remember when we're interacting with people. So I just encourage you to be cool, be with a lot of grace. So go out tonight, and we want to send big thanks to Dave Hatter for a great presentation. Take all your protected devices, go out and have fun with them, and remember to empower you.